Alrighty, hi everybody. Happy Monday.
Hi.
We'll go ahead and call the meeting, the OSBA Executive Team Committee meeting to order. I'm sorry. Is that Sammy? I heard something.
I'm sorry, I'll go on
Okay,
mute.
we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. So first order of business, item 2 is to approve the agenda. So do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
Madam Chair, this is Chris. I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Thank
I will second that.
you, Chris. Do I hear a second? Thank you. First and seconded. Any questions? Or any items that need to be added to the agenda?
I guess one
Hearing
quick
none.
question.
All those in favor of approving the agenda?
Madam Chair, I have a request for clarification.
Oh boy, my internet's a little spotty. Give me just a second here. Could you repeat that, Scott?
I just have a request for clarification.
Here. All right, give me a second. I don't know if I'm still with you guys, but I'm not hearing anything. My
You are
internet's
still with us.
spotty.
We can hear
I'll
you.
try to dial in.
We can hear you, Sonia. We can hear you.
Okay, I just couldn't hear what Scott said.
I just have a request for clarification on the agenda.
Sure, go ahead.
Will we have any clarity on sort of the events that led up to this? I know there's a comment about agenda item 3, whistleblower complaint. Will that include sort of the process that OSBA went through to arrive at today outside of the complaint itself?
Yes, that's exactly what this meeting's called for. Thank you for asking for that clarification. That is why Kimberly is here, and I do want to be respectful of her time. She has 30 minutes in her capacity with us today. So yes, your answer to that question is yes.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So with that, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye.
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 Great. Okay, so let's move on. So we're going to item 3, the whistleblower complaint. Hopefully everyone has had an opportunity. The documents were sent to the board today. So you received the original complaint, the report, and the executive summary. I'm going to hand this over to Kim, who's going to share the timeline, my process as board chair, as board president, my role in this, and then we'll also have to discuss some actions we'd like to recommend, like this executive committee to consider and recommend to the board. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Kim. You have questions. Jim, do you have a question? Go ahead.
I haven't received anything.
Madam Chair, that question is actually in
Yeah,
alignment with mine. When I looked through the distribution of this today, I did not see Jim on it.
Yeah, so that is, and also that is something that Kimberly will also address in this. Thank you for both of those questions. They'll be addressed.
Well, Madam Chair, then I think I would like to get my legal counsel involved in this meeting. Since I have not seen the document that you will be discussing, I would like to call for this meeting to be over and for me to have my legal counsel in the meeting representing me. You have counsel. I apparently don't right now.
But Jim, we're trying to resolve an issue that wasn't addressed in the board meeting. This is not in any way, shape, or form about your performance.
Respectfully,
or your role.
Madam Chair, the board dealt with this issue.
Okay, as I said, I was trying to clarify the whistleblower, the process of the whistleblower. I wanted to provide that clarification of my process that I went through with legal counsel. I felt it's really important that the executive team is aware of the process. And that is why I brought Kimberly in to share. And I I think it's important that we're all here to listen to that.
Well, Madam Chair, did you share my contract with Kimberly? Because under my contract, I am to be given all documents and information related to things, and I have not been given them.
Well, yes, I understand it, Jim. So, and I appreciate
Then
you
you're in
sharing
breach
that.
of my
concern.
contract, Madam President.
So, may I point of, I don't know, Jim?
No, Sammy,
sorry.
I want the president to answer my question.
Okay.
So yes, Jim. So in regards to this process, we're talking specifically about the whistleblower, the process for reviewing, evaluating, and sharing the whistleblower complaint with the board. I'm following the Council of Kimberly, and so and I don't believe, and Kimberly can weigh in here, that that's in conflict with anything in your contract.
And again, my question, Madam President, is did you give my contract to Kimberly to refer to? And the board of director and executive director operating agreements to review in light of this? So,
point of, I don't know, privilege, if that's okay, Jim, and Sonia and Kim, and I want to give something that may clarify this for you, Jim, in good faith. In review of your working agreement and your contractual obligations, I believe the purpose of this meeting is to do good faith efforts to provide you with the documentation that you need, yes, and you're asking for, according to the proper manner, while still protecting the integrity of communication that is supposed to arrive at the board first, then be released to you with board action, to be very proper to the process. This is my assessment, and I would really encourage, if you have the if you would give the space for Kim maybe to provide that context. Jim, I believe it will be for your pleasing. That being said, I totally understand if you don't want to participate. There is to my understanding, there is no action this committee will be doing regarding your employment. It is actions to support you doing your jobs, and actions to support the concluding the whistleblower complaints properly and supporting you with the operational aspects to it. And that's the purpose of this meeting. So,
well, Sammy, I'm sorry if I can't believe in that good faith, because you and the president have had multiple opportunities to talk to me about this and present the documents to me.
We did not.
And
we did not.
You had multiple opportunities to present this to the board and the executive committee through proper channels, which you did not do.
Actually,
the board
Jim,
and
point
the
of order.
Committee with
I would
this
like
information.
to speak. Right.
I still would like to have my
council why we're here.
present.
I'd like for Kimberly to share that I've.
It looks like there's
Kimberly,
Scott's got his hand up.
Well, and I wouldn't, if
yes,
Madam
go
Chair,
ahead, Scott.
you know, and I do want to be respectful to Sammy's comment about process, but one of the things, and I'll just be candid, one of our policies, 6400, clearly states that basically all outside counsel needs to be approved by the executive committee. So one of the conversations I would like to have is, how is the process where outside counsel was brought in without any involvement of the executive committee? So if we're talking about process, that's something that quite honestly concerns me, and I think has put the association at risk. Up until this conversation last week, there was no engagement with the executive.
That's great. That's a great question. So let's let Kimberly, can we let Kimberly respond to that? Because I did, she is outside counsel for OSBA and is hired for that capacity. Could you answer that question, Kimberly?
Yeah, in terms of the executive committee's obligation to approve outside counsel, it's my understanding that I've been approved for many years as outside counsel for OSBA, and I've served in that capacity. And from time to time, I am called upon to respond to legal issues that arise. And that has been an ongoing relationship that I have had as outside counsel. What happened in this case, and let me just briefly, I think Sonia asked me to be here today just to reaffirm that this was an unusual situation in the sense that we had a whistleblower complaint that came in under the policy. It was made to me as outside counsel, who's listed in the handbook as someone that a whistleblower can go to make a whistleblower complaint. And since the executive director was named in that whistleblower complaint, the effort was made to keep the process clean and the integrity of the process to move forward so that he would not be directly involved in the processing of that complaint, since he was named tangentially as someone involved in these compliance issues, as you saw from the complaint that was redacted, by the way, to make sure that the whistleblower's name has not been revealed. But there was a real effort made to try to keep this process clean and the investigation done in a way that honors the process of investigating in a neutral and unbiased way, so that we could get the findings made and presented to the board and have the board understand what this complaint was, and the findings which were outlined last week in the meeting were very much in line with what the recommendations were that were made, and that process is dictated by the OSBA handbook, which I think Sonia, listening to advice of counsel, followed in order to make sure that the integrity of the process was preserved. And that's the only thing that was happening in this case, and the only thing that I think we were attempting to accomplish was to get this to the board so that you could see what the complaint was, could see what the recommendations were, and the hope and expectation was that those recommendations would be adopted and affirmed, and the board would then turn this matter over to the executive director for processing. It was a compliance issue that ultimately that's what was determined by the findings and recommendations of the report. And that's, I think at this point, Sonia and Sammy have expressed concern that they want to make sure that the executive committee authorizes the release of this report to Jim, and they're satisfied that that's appropriate at this time. I think that was the recommendation and the discussion at the meeting last week, and I think they just want to hear from the executive committee that that is in fact what is expected, is that the report should be released. Jim should go forward with his process of trying to resolve the compliance issues. And so what we're left with also is last week in the open session, a motion was made to find the whistleblower complaint unsubstantiated. And that motion was voted on and passed. And I think, that's a board action, but it's one that seems inconsistent with what the actual conversation was, which is that it was unsubstantiated that there was any fraud or efforts to try and divert in any way or to subvert the PERS compliance, but rather there were issues that were identified that need to be corrected. And so I think the question is whether or not the board is going to be willing to revisit that and resolve it so that the record is clear that what was in fact unsubstantiated and what needs to happen going forward.
Scott, you have your hand raised.
Yeah,
And
thank
then
you, Madam
Chris.
Chair. I guess, Kim, I appreciate the clarity of that. I am supportive of this document being released to Jim. Again, as what I heard from the board, and I'll just be honest, I've had multiple board members reach out to me since last week, outside of the executive committee, and they were, again, supportive. This is what I've heard routinely. This is an operational issue. Yes, it doesn't, it's not nefarious. Upon reading the documents today, just further reiterated that, in my opinion, and I am supportive of them being released. I do want to circle back, though, and I guess, Madam Chair, just to Kim's point, while I respect the fact that given that the nature of this complaint was directed towards the executive director, and want to be thoughtful of that, I'm still in agreement of the notion that policy 6400 stipulates that it should have gone to the executive committee, even if it was purely with the notion that this is a whistleblower complaint. against our ED, do I have support from the executive committee to move in this manner and engage with outside counsel? That conversation never happened. And that, just to be candid, Madam Chair, is my frustration. This should have at least gone to the attention of the executive committee, where there could have been a dialogue around what could be and could not be the concerns and the risks, and how to best proceed, and whether we wanted to engage with outside counsel. That's my frustration, is that that conversation did not occur. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments, Scott. Thank you. Chris, go ahead.
You're on mute, Chris.
I said, okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm the one that made the motion that it was unsubstantiated, and why I might have worded that better. We did have discussion that reflected on the positive movement toward directing our executive director to release the results of the investigative report toward PERS to PERS. I do want to say, and I did also have board members reach out to me with quite a sense of frustration. In retrospect, and I absolutely understand positive and assign positive intent to all involved. But it put our board in tremendous disadvantage to be asked to consider this complaint without any documentation available for them. And so, in effect, we had Ms. Mora, we had you. You're clearly capable, and your report seemed thorough. We had just you telling us. We did not have any paperwork to look at and to read ahead of time. And so in that respect, in my opinion, it was unsubstantiated. So that was part of why I worded my motion that way. Having said that, I do support very much the recommendation to ask our executive director to release the interpretive or the investigative report to PERS.
Okay. Sammy, you had your hand up. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, maybe since the time is limited with Kim, I'll let her maybe provide any more context needed. But I just want to respond to the retrospective and moving forward. Retrospective, we need to probably talk about it. My understanding of the process is the external counsel receives complaints and initiates investigations automatically, and before even the president was notified or the executive committee or the board was to be notified. And when the findings were available, that's when the president was notified for the purposes of summoning the full board. And based on legal counsel, the recommendation was to provide the context to the full board instead of the executive committee, and to present the findings to the full board before providing the documentation. Definitely we can review the process as it's happened. The understanding that I have from my conversation with Kimberly, and maybe you can elaborate more, is to protect the integrity of the process. You engage in the investigation immediately after receiving it, and you've been retained as one of two external counsels that a whistleblower, according to policy, can reach out to, and that will initiate the investigation. So I'll just stop there, just to provide a context for Scott's point.
Well, just for clarity, I received the complaint and I provided it to Chris Davidson, the COO, because Jim was the named individual in the complaint, and asked for guidance from him, and to who would be the appropriate person. And so he received the complaint, and shortly thereafter contacted me and asked me to proceed with an investigation. So I'm not sure what the channels were that came together to authorize that, but that was my request from Chris Davidson. So I didn't just initiate a complaint on my own or an investigation on my own. I was requested to do that. So.
Yeah, and thank you, Kimberly. I appreciate the clarity on that. Again, I guess I'm going to reiterate my frustration here is that per our own policy, anytime outside counsel is to be engaged, needs to be authorized by the executive committee, and that did not happen. And here we are. And I know we've only got a limited time with Kimberly, but here we are now with our ED, who is wanting to kind of negotiate an exit strategy, and none of the executive committee was aware of that. process to get here. And here we are. Now the 5 of us, the executive committee, is holding the bag. And it just makes me immensely frustrated that we are here. So I'll get off my soapbox.
So we had talked about Kimberly sharing with the executive committee what the language we need to share with do we need to share foreseeable sharing language with the board to mitigate or to change reverse the action that was taken in the last board meeting?
Well, I
Do
think
you want
that's,
to talk a little bit about that?
well, I think that's the conversation that both Sammy and Sonia believe ought to be had by the executive committee, is whether you think it's necessary to correct the record in some way based on the motion that passed last week. And if so, whether you think it's important to entertain a motion with the full board to then, clarify for the record that you're adopting the findings or recommendations and sending this matter back to Jim for further processing, or whether you don't think that's necessary, you have some other option you'd like to discuss.
If I may, Madam Chair.
So there's also that. There's also the release of the yeah, just a moment. I'm still responding to that. So there is that item, and then also the limited release of the investigatory report to PERS was the other item that we wanted to see if the committee wanted to discuss.
I think
Scott.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess, Madam Chair, and I'm uncertain, so the question that you are posing to the executive committee is whether we want to revisit the motion that was made following executive session from the other day, and then clarify what information is being released or given Jim the authorization to release. Is that correct?
So so the one motion I wanted to see if we wanted to entertain with the full board is that we would authorize that that we would, as a board, we would authorize and delegate the decisions for the executive director to make the we would direct him to make the corrections in the contract so it is compliant, because that was, from my understanding and my role in sharing with the board, that was a recommended motion. And because of the actions of the board last week, where we said that the complaint was not valid, that we might want to correct that with the board. And then by doing that, that would release the report to Jim so he can make those corrections. And then the second motion would be the board could authorize a limit release of the investigatory report to PERS so that information can be shared with them for the investigation.
I guess I've not yet seen, or I guess I'll be honest, I don't recall what the motion was, so I'm not in a position to confirm. And per the chat that appears to be there, notes that Jim has already started that process. So I guess I'm just a little uncertain what the request is.
Madam Chair.
Okay. Yes, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I made the motion. I said the motion was that the complaint was unsubstantiated, and I talked about that. I don't think that my personal feeling is that we as an executive committee, I don't think we need to revisit the motion with the full board. I think as an executive committee, we can ask our executive director to proceed with rectifying any possible PERS issues, and to also release if he deems it. No, I don't even know if we need to say that, and to also consider releasing the investigative report to PERS. One of my hesitations, and I will just say this, and again, Kimberly, I don't know you, so I'm just I don't know you. You seem very competent. However, I don't know what the PERS requirements are. I know what you said they were, and I know what your recommendations are, but I haven't seen what was violated. You said there were PERS requirements that were violated. I don't think I can personally make that decision that the investigative report needs to be released without more information. But I do think our executive director and his team can make that decision and release a report if it is in the best interest of OSBA to do so.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's appropriate. And I would mention, Chris, that in the investigation report, you do have the standards that are listed in the investigation report. And though you should have those.
Okay. I
Yeah,
haven't
that's all
had a
listed.
chance to read that yet, so.
Yeah, that's important to do that before the meeting. Thanks. Emily, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I thought the motion that we did pass was saying exactly that, to let Jim do his job.
Well, the motion, well, what the record is what it is. I guess you have to revisit that.
That wasn't the motion.
What the motion was.
Yeah, that wasn't a motion. That wasn't what the motion was.
Yeah,
And
I mean-
it is part of the recommendation and as part of a whistleblower report, and that is why we were drafting these motions, because it's not that it's just operational, but it's tied to a whistleblower report. And so I was following the advice of legal counsel on what to share with the board and what we should do, what our actions should be. Sammy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be brutally honest and transparent, but with a preamble, I believe the intention of every committee member, every person in this room, and our legal counsel and Jim is in the right place, and we trust each other. And I want to just assume that everybody believes in that, and I believe in that. So let me start from that starting point. Now, to be brutally honest, the perceived reading that I have of the public meeting motion is that we have dismissed the findings of the report. While it is well intended that we accept that the report found the executive director did not have any ill intention, and also that there are some operational issues need to be corrected. And since those findings has been presented to the board, they sit with the board to decide with them. And the reading of the motion on its face value, just think of it as you are reading minutes of another company or another organization, and you read that motion. The reading of it is the board did not accept the findings and did not find any of that as worthy of implementing, while the sentiment that we have is that no, we see it worthy of implementing. We want to delegate it to Jim, but since it's been provided to us, since Jim was named on it, we have to act. And that's where I think we need to do three things. Number one, we rescind the motion that we had. Number two, and in the same way, we accept the investigator report findings as submitted by the legal counsel. Number two, provide Jim with authority to cooperate and work with PERS with the findings of that report to the extent that he sees acceptable. And number three, to actually accept those recommendations. So I believe that's our path forward, to just make it very clear that our intentions, our emotions, and our votes are consistent, and that client privileged communication, attorney-client privilege communication that we have from the attorney is released to Jim, so he can do that work. And that decision lays down within the board, or with guidance from Kimberly, lays down, at least the release of the documents lays down with the executive committee right now to act on the intent.
Thank you, Sammy. Scott?
Yes, Madam Chair, Sammy, I appreciate clarity to that. I would actually probably turn it to Jim and be like, Jim, what do you need based upon the motion that was made? And I'll just be honest, I've heard from multiple board members, and I'll be honest, it was not a conversation that I want to revisit. So I would be really hesitant to go back to the board and kind of peel this scab off a little bit, right? So I'd like to at least have clarity from Jim about, Jim, did the motion made last week give you the authority you need to proceed with that? Or do we need to go back and dust this whole conversation off with the board again?
Scott, thanks for the question. I've already acted. As a matter of fact, I asked legal
Mhm.
counsel to send me the recommendations, have them sent to me. I've already begun a conversation with COSA, with Craig Hawkins and Shelley Regattini on if we're going to move forward, these are the things we need to have going forward. I asked that those be sent to me. I also asked Kim to begin conversations with PERS. I've yet to receive those recommendations. Kim did send me an updated email with regard to PERS. But Kim, I guess my question to you is, who told you not to send me those recommendations?
I asked Sonia for approval to do that, and she wanted to wait until we had this executive committee meeting to make sure that the committee is on board. I felt that, yeah, so I complied with that.
And I've already started
And
this
so
process
with
in motion.
with our conversation here, I'm actually okay. But I was speaking. So, and so what I told Kimberly is that I wanted to be sure we had this conversation. I wanted the executive team to know about the process, that I followed legal counsel, and that I'd be happy to share the recommendations so that you can act. That this was never about withholding information. I'm simply following a process that legal counsel that was been hired by OSBA to share this report with me. I've been following their counsel. So I'm happy to do that.
May I?
Go ahead, Sammy.
Team, and I mean by this team, all of us. Think about it this way. As it stands right now, in the eyes of the public, a document sits with the board, and the board needs to decide on it vis-a-vis the organization actions and some named individuals. The chair, or even the executive committee, in my opinion, of the organization or the board have only one authority: to summon the team to make actions, and that's it. So releasing documents, releasing information, in my view and my understanding, sits with either this committee, if delegated, or the full board, and that's it. So really, I think what we need to do now is to protect the integrity of the whistleblower investigation, is to do a clean handoff, that we found the report, we either agree or don't agree with its finding, and if we agree with its finding, transmit it to those who need to follow up on it. As simple as that. If this executive committee sees it's acceptable, I would like to move to authorize the executive director to access the report findings, and also for the executive committee to recommend actions for the full board in compliance with legal counsel consult.
Madam Chair, sorry if I'm just not grasping the concept, but given that, and again, I just want to be totally objective and process, given that you had sort of asked Kimberly not to distribute that, couldn't you use your authority as the president to give Kimberly I'm authorized?
I didn't say, yeah.
Sorry, could you not say, Kimberly,
ahead.
go ahead and release those documents that were provided to the board to Jim today and just cut him loose? I mean, he's already engaged with those parties. So I guess I'm a little uncertain as to why we need to go back to the full board here if we could just release those.
I think that council has already explained that a couple of times why. However, as what Sammy mentioned, I'm happy to do that. But I think that what Sammy was trying to say is that we want to see if the executive team can agree to that we've the validity of the whistleblower report and that we can release the documents to the important information to Jim that he needs to the recommendations, and then we can also release the investigative material, can provide access to PERS. Because apparently from what I've been told in the process with Kimberly is that we would need to do that requires board action.
Well,
while we're still on the, sorry to interrupt, Kimberly.
Is that correct, Kimberly?
Just noting that the balance of the executive committee had not seen this information. Did Sammy see this information prior to it being released to the board? knowing that the executive committee outside of myself, I'm not aware that Chris, Emily, or I saw it. So I'm a little uncertain as to why one member of the executive
I
committee
did
saw
share
it
that
and the
with him.
balance did not.
Scott, I can answer that.
Yes, you did. I
With
did.
agreements with legal counsel, I would like to share, yes, I did access it for business continuity purposes, and we couldn't share it with a third person because of the quorum requirements.
Even though our
violate-
policy 6400 clearly states it has to have a full support of the executive committee before we go to any outside counsel.
Actually, no, because the whistleblower complaints have a different process that supersedes that. The whistleblower complaint says legal counsel receives, and I want to be very clear. We have ethical obligation to say we take the whistleblower complaint seriously, and we don't want to shortcut it.
I'm not discounting that.
Good. So the whistleblower complaint says very clearly the external counsel of OSBA received that complaint, and as legal counsel mentioned, they went ahead with the investigation based on a direction from staff to move forward. When they had the reports ready for agenda setting purposes, they submitted and transmitted to the recipients. Since the executive director was named, the recipient is the president. The president simply worked with the legal counsel and with me for business continuity purposes to set the agenda and call for a meeting. If something happens to the president, I was ready to jump in and run the meeting. And I wanted to have Chris Cronin to be on, but I was advised that, again, even though having business continuity is important, we should be observant that the executive committee, for the integrity of the whistleblower complaint, not review this before it's presented for the full board. Now, if we want in the future change that, we need to stipulate that and make it very clear that the executive committee will be the gateway between any investigation findings and presenting it to the full board. If that's what pleases the board, we can do that and we can write it down. Right now, it's not written down, and I believe that's what happened. So let's just be very clear. We have a whistleblower complaint process that we need to be very scrupulous in observing and protecting the rights of the organization and the integrity of the organization, that we follow it to the teeth.
Thank you, Sammy. Jim, do you have a comment?
I have a question of Kim. Kim,
Yes.
was that your legal advice to Sonia to share it with Sammy? Was it also your legal advice to share it with the entire board today? Or was it your advice to share it with just the executive committee? Did you also instruct the president not to share it with me, even in a redacted form?
The answer to the last question is no. I have consulted with Sonia about her request to do some of these things. I have. So those were consultations that we've had on an ongoing basis. But I had discussed with her and requested authority to share with you the recommendations. And she wanted to wait until the executive committee met today in order to find out their position. I believe, based on my presence at the board meeting last week, that the board was very clear that they wanted you to move forward on this, and that sharing those documents with you would be appropriate. And now it sounds like the committee has reiterated that. And so that should happen, in my opinion.
But Kim, my
Yeah.
question still
And I-
stands. Did you advise Sonia to share the document with Sammy?
I didn't advise her. She asked to do that. She said she was going to do it, and that's what happened.
All right, so how do we move forward?
Madam
what I've
President,
heard,
I
we
don't
are-
know that we can move forward.
Mhm.
I have done what was asked of me to do, to begin the process with Kim to get the recommendations.
Mhm.
You apparently stalled that.
Mhm.
I asked Kim to reach out to
No,
PERS
actually-
as well, which she did. Madam President, I
Mhm.
would like to finish my statement, please. You have yet to address
Sure,
the
go ahead,
email that I
Jim.
sent to the executive committee.
I actually did respond to you, Jim, and I didn't want to talk about that now. I wanted to schedule a time to address that, and I did email a response to you. Respectfully, I did. And I have been trying to reach you since that time without reaching you. So would I like to address this matter first, if that's okay? So part of this discussion, the executive team would like to release the document to Jim so that he can do his follow through and have those conversations with COSTA, address the issues with the contract, and then also to release the document to PERS for their investigation. And doing that without going back to the board. Is that correct?
I believe council said not to release the document to PERS in our previous meeting. Kim said to share it with them, but not to give them a copy. That is different than releasing the document.
That's what I meant.
Sure.
Okay, so I'll change my language then. So as you mentioned, not releasing the document, but sharing the document. As Kimberly mentioned, they could come into the office and view the document. Is that correct, Kim?
Yes. That's what they requested. That's what we've discussed as being the appropriate approach to sharing that information with them.
Right. And so the request that I received from Kimberly was late in the afternoon on Friday. Is that correct, Kim? And I did reply and was doing some things for work and thought that would be better suited that we would have the discussion today. And then we would, with the anticipation that we would release the document so that Jim could do his work. There was no intent to stall or keep anything from you. Sammy, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do have a motion if that pleases the chair.
Yes, go ahead.
It's gonna be a long one, so I'm gonna copy paste it on the chat and read it.
Okay.
I move that the executive committee moves to authorize the executive director to access the recommendations in the investigatory reports and delegate the decision around bringing independent contractor contracts to compliance to the executive director. The executive committee further moved to recommend to the full board to affirm the executive committee actions and to further adopt the following motions. Motion 1. Accept the reports and its recommendations and authorize the executive director to access it and delegate the decision around the independent contractor to the executive director. The motion will read, I move to direct the executive director to proceed with the recommendations presented by the legal counsel investigative reports and further move to share the investigative reports with the executive director to implement the recommendations, including but not limited to bringing employment and contractual agreements to compliance. Motion 2.
I do have a quick question.
Authorize the motion in order. I'm sorry. Motion 2. Authorize a limited release of the investigator report to PERS investigation. I move to, with our motion would read, I move that the board present the whistleblower investigation reports with PERS investigator to assist with their investigation to notify PERS and of the OSBA corrective actions in the meeting following this report, including actions taken in this meeting. I further move to direct the executive director to provide updates to PERS investigator on corrective actions taken based on the findings of this report. Motion 3. I move to the motion would read, I move to rescind the actions made at the November 2nd board meeting and to further move to accept the whistleblower investigation report's findings as submitted by OSBA external legal counsel. The motion ends.
Okay, thank you for the motion, Sammy. Scott?
Madam Chair, point of clarification. Sammy's not able to vote. I don't know why he is making the motion or crafting the motion.
Executive committee members can make motions, Scott. And if not, I have ethical obligation to share this motion, but I believe it is an order since I'm an executive committee member. And there's a motion waiting for a second.
There's a motion. Okay, is there any action on the first motion?
Sorry, Sonia, it is one motion, includes a recommendation of 3 motions to the full board.
Okay.
And if there's
So
no
I'm
second,
asking
the motion
for,
fails.
okay. My internet is cutting out, so I'm getting half of what you said, so.
Yeah, sorry, it is one motion that includes immediate authorization for the executive director to access the reports as he requested, and also a recommendation of 3 motions for the full board to adopt in its next meeting. And the motion is in order, but there is no second yet. If there's no second, the motion fails.
Okay. I couldn't hear, I'm having trouble hearing. Can't hear anything. Can you guys hear me? Because I can't hear anybody.
We can hear you.
Chris.
Chris has her hand up.
My internet's cutting in and out.
So Sammy,
Chris, go ahead.
yeah, sorry. Sammy, I understand where you're coming from. I feel like this is the longest motion I've ever heard of, and I don't think that I can, I'm willing to second it so that we can vote on it. But I have to be honest, I've already stated my belief that we don't need to send this back to the full board. So that's still my belief, but I'm willing to second it so that we can vote on it.
Okay, so that's a second.
To the motion?
Yes, I seconded the motion.
All right. Can I
Okay.
speak to the motion? Thank you, Chris. Madam President, I
Right,
want to just really thank, if I may speak to the motion, I'm sorry.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but as I said, I had to be out of here at 4:30, and I really apologize. I have to leave at this point, but if
Okay.
there's any follow-up you need, just let me know.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. We appreciate you. All right. Who was speaking? Sammy, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may speak to the motion, first of all, I appreciate my gratitude for Chris for entertaining a discussion on this motion. This motion fulfills what I understand, and after vetting it through legal counsel, I believe it is the best way for us to move forward to accomplish multiple objectives. Number one, objective 1 is give the executive director a clean handoff of the documents as soon as possible. And really the responsibility lays on with either the executive committee or the full board. And if the executive committee is in agreement that we release it as soon as possible, so we can implement those recommendations in a timely manner, while maintaining the integrity of the investigative report as a report that still lays within the full board. Number 2, it is my understanding that these 3 motions that we are presenting to the full board for reconsideration will protect the board, will protect the organization, that the organization and the board is making its due diligence to achieve the following. Number 1, accepting the recommendations and make it very clear that the whistleblower findings are agreed to by the institution. And by that, the report now is valid and is properly shared with those who need to act on it. And while the sentiment of the board is to authorize us to act on their behalf, the motion that the full board have voted on its face value supersedes that and may contradict with it. And the only way to make it very clean handoff is to say, we're actually moving back. The full board that moved before with one direction moves back to the original direction. Let's move to the to rescind the motion and then accept the whistleblower investigation findings as submitted by external counsel, and then reaffirm that we cooperate with PERS, reaffirm that we want the executive director to access the reports, and reaffirm that this is now operational after we have signed off on the reports and the process as concluded. So that's why I believe this motion is its entirety, which is immediate action, giving the recommendations to the executive director and authorizing him to make contractual decisions, is proper and is important, given he is named in the whistleblower complaint. That we agree, even if he already acted on it, that we agree that he's in the right direction. We protect ourselves as a board and organization, that we're in line, that we're doing the right thing. Number two, that's we're really putting the onus on the board to make to be in agreement with that through those three motions. So I strongly, with the strongest terms, say, please vote yes on this motion, so we maintain the integrity of the whistleblower process. We move forward with a path that supports our executive director and moves with the intent of the full board to delegate this work for Jim.
Thanks, Sammy. Emily.
Thank you. Linnell, are you able to read or tell us what the actual motion was that was passed in our earlier meeting? If I'm not sure if you have that yet or not, but I would just like to hear exactly what we passed.
I have access to it. I have not downloaded the recording yet. I can attempt to download it, but I'm going to make Emily the host in case it crashes my computer.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go on to Chris. We'll wait for that. Chris?
Okay, Sammy, my friend. I agree with motion number one, the first part of your three-part motion. If you would amend your motion to include just that first part, I would be willing to support that. I understand where you're coming from. I beg to differ with you. I don't think that we need further action from the full board on this matter. I think that I understand your argument about protecting the whistleblower process. I think that the whistleblower process has been protected, more than protected. And that might be a discussion for another time. I think that if the organization takes the corrective action by direction of the executive committee and by the action of our executive director, that's enough. I don't think we need to go back and confuse and involve the full board any further in this. I think we can direct our president to give a report to the board that the matter is being successfully resolved, or to whatever effect. I think that would be very positive and a public and in the minutes, and would put on record that we acknowledge that there were issues that needed to be corrected and they are being corrected, or something like that. But I don't think we need to ask them for another vote. So again, my suggestion at this point is that you amend your motion, and I would support number one, motion one.
Okay, Sammy, what are your thoughts? And we have the information in the chat, Emily, about what was mentioned in the meeting, the motion. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And just reading the motion that we voted on has considered whistleblower complaints and heard counsel, and that it is unsubstantiated. This is strong. Board actions supersede executive committee actions unless delegated. And I want to make it very clean. If someone asks for the minutes of the board, they see that the board, the executive committee, and the executive director are all in the same direction. And that's where I'm always willing to compromise, but I've thought about this I've spent hours on this. I'm going to tell you, I've spent hours on this, really studying it and going back and forth with Kim to make sure we do it right for the best interest of protecting our staff and protecting our organization. I have to really decline for going for any amendment to this. I believe this is the best way to make it very clean, and we could have it as one resolution that the board votes on, quick but clean as well. I think that's where I really have to stand firm on the motion in its entirety. I'm sorry.
Emily, your hand is up.
Madam Chair, I'd like to call for the vote.
Okay, so do I hear a vote on the motions on the table? Motions 1, 2, and 3. A vote in favor. Please signify by raising your hand.
Aye.
All right, any opposed, raise your hand. Okay, so we have 2 in favor, 2 opposed,
Counted 3 opposed.
3 opposed. Okay, so 3, 2. Okay, so that motion fails. Okay. Okay, so we will what I'd like to do is I did want to address if there are no other discussion or considerations about the whistleblower, to see if we could schedule a meeting to consider the comments that were in Jim's email, to consider executive director requests. I wanted to provide time to respectfully talk with Jim and share his concerns if he feels that that meeting is necessary. I'd
Sonia?
like to schedule that time. Yes.
Before we go there, I just want to recognize the board did not make any action of releasing, or the committee did not make any action of releasing the documents. And given it is very urgent, I just want to highlight the responsibility lays with us that we did not release it to it. And maybe if you're okay to entertain within the same subjects line, any attempt from committee members, and I'll back off right now, but our executive director is asking for this document, and whether it is the board or the executive committee, we need to act and give him the document. And given the failed motion, I just want to recognize we did not authorize that yet. So before we go to the next agenda item, I really would urge my colleagues to, if not reconsider my motion, to make a motion.
Emily.
For that.
But if I understood correctly, the legal counsel said she understood that to be the intent of our other meeting, and she was fine with releasing it, unless I was confused about that.
That was my understanding.
My understanding is that yeah.
Actually, that's her understanding.
It does need.
There is a document that's in the power of the board. The board needs to make action to hand it over. Right now, we have a motion from the board saying this is unsubstantiated report. We don't want to give it to the subject of that report if we found it unsubstantiated. So we need to, at the least, say it. Right now we stand as a board saying this is unsubstantiated report, and we're going to give it to the executive director unofficially. I think we need to be on the record. Either say it is substantiated, and we're going to give it to the director, and we need to be on the record.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we authorize the executive director to receive and utilize as needed the information regarding the redacted investigation report, whistleblower complaint, summary whistleblower investigation findings, and the redacted whistleblower report. I authorize Jim Green, the executive director, to work with outside parties to finalize this process.
Second.
Okay, got a first and a second. And so the motion was to release the redacted
Wait, wait.
investigative report.
I'm sorry,
yes.
who seconded it?
What was that?
My apologies, I didn't catch who seconded.
Emily.
Emily
So
Smith.
Scott and then Scott and Emily.
Thank you.
Okay, so any discussion? Jim, you have your hand raised.
I don't think I
Okay, all
need
those
to
in-
see the report.
Okay.
If
It's
you
just
allow
the
me to work with
recommendations, is that
counsel
right?
on the recommendations that she has to clarify this, I think that's fine enough. If you want to protect the whistleblower and its process, then I don't need to see the report. I need access to counsel as I asked her last week to share the recommendations with me so we can get this matter taken care of. That's all I need.
And that is exactly right. And that's all I wanted to do is by having this meeting and trying to rectify what happened in the last board meeting, but and also be sure you have access to what you need to follow through and to make the contracts in compliance. So we could redraft the motion, restate the motion.
Madam Chair, I'd like
We
to
want to give.
restate my motion
ahead,
to
Scott.
authorize the executive director to proceed with negotiating and finalizing this process, including working with outside counsel as required.
Second.
All right, we have a first and a second.
The mo-
And so my comment,
Sorry,
so
go
my
ahead.
comment is this will be Jim, just clarification, Jim, you are asking for the recommendations from the report, is that correct?
I'm asking for the recommendations to make the contract viable under the report from the attorney. That's what I asked her for last week and apparently wasn't given the authority to have.
Got it. And does this also include access for PERS, or will that be a separate motion?
That includes, to clarify my motion, that includes access for PERS. Again, working with outside parties to resolve this issue as required.
Thank you.
Caution you on
Sammy?
saying access to PERS.
Yes, I just authorized our executive director to work with outside parties to ensure that this issue is resolved successfully, including working with outside counsel.
Okay, Sammy.
I just want to make sure if Jim is comfortable with the motion. Would like to have a comment if he's in favor of it or not, as before we move to a vote. Also, I want to share my support of the motion with a serious reservations that this motion still does not close the loop on putting the organization on the record in favor of the findings. Until today, the board did not act in favor of accepting the findings of the reports. And I believe this will put the organization under liability, but in favor of reducing that liability from the perspective of compliance with the contractual obligations, I'm in favor of this. However, I want to really put on the record my concerns that we have not addressed another layer of liability, which is compliance of the organization by making an action of accepting the whistleblower investigative report findings that it remains unaddressed by neither the executive committee or the full board. So with that, I am in support for that level of compliance, which is supporting the executive director of addressing the contractual obligations that we have.
Thank you, Sammy. So we have a first and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All right, that passes. Motion passes. Okay, so we need to schedule the next meeting. Can we have Linnell do that doodle poll just in respect of time? We just need an hour to meet, hopefully on Wednesday, whether it be virtual or in person. Can we do that? Agree to do that?
Madam Chair, I'm not available on Monday or on Wednesday due to I'll be honest, all of my work stuff getting shoved into Wednesday from Thursday, Friday. So I'm not available on Wednesday.
And I'll be traveling on Wednesday. to Portland. So, yeah, I plan to be there Thursday for the 3-hour meeting.
Tomorrow?
Mhm.
I don't, is the 3-hour
Thursday.
meeting isn't happening, is it?
I'm sorry,
Is the 3-hour meeting happening on Thursday?
didn't mention anything about a 3-hour meeting. The next meeting I
Okay.
have scheduled that I wanted to plan was a 1-hour meeting to give time to and respect to and space to talk with Jim about his email and concern for his health, his well-being, everything that was mentioned in the email. So I need an hour. We were trying to consolidate because I anticipated we would have additional meetings. So I need 1 hour of your time. And if Jim feels that that's enough time, I'd like to try to schedule something before convention. So we need an hour.
I'm available tomorrow if anyone else is.
Great. So I'll have Linnell first look at Jim's calendar and mine. And then everyone else will look and see if we can get as many people as possible. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, I'll make myself available tomorrow anytime.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. Appreciate it. We are adjourned.
Thank you.